G'day. So I've got a miss in the engine of my Toyota Bundera. Now, something my grandfather said to me when I was very young was always start with the simple things first. And the number of times I see people say, you gotta fix the cylinder head. You know, your head gasket's blown. And the issue is a shorting plug lead or something like that, which gets resolved when you fix the head gasket. But hey, it wasn't the problem. So always start with the simple things first. So I've been doing that over a period of time to find out what this miss is about. Well, I think I've got to the bottom of it. And I think the problem is my valve stem seals. But that's caused a number of other issues down the line, and we're going to look into that in this series of videos. Here at Mad Matt 4 Drive, I'm all about educating and building community. So if you love this content and it's really helpful to you, I would appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button down the bottom there. So where is the issue? Well, this motor on the overrun or on a prolonged idle tends to smoke up a little bit after that. And that indicates that these little seals here, the valve stem seals, I'll hold that up for you, you can see that, tiny little seal. We'll get into these in more detail in a minute, later in the video, but they seal engine oil from getting into the combustion chamber by sealing around the valve stem. And in this motor, when I'm on a prolonged overrun, which is basically when the motor's generating its highest level of vacuum, a little bit of oil sucks down past those seals, and then I get a plume of blue smoke out the exhaust. Or if I prolong idle, same thing happens when I give it a blip on the throttle or take off from a set of traffic lights, I get a big plume of blue smoke. Classic symptoms of these seals being failed. Now here's why I'm getting a miss. If this was a carburetor engine, it wouldn't be giving me a miss. But this is what I reckon's going on. The engine oil is coming through the exhaust system and it's fouled up one of my O2 sensors. Being a V6, I've got two of these. The O2 sensor is all about measuring how much oxygen is in the exhaust system. So essentially, what I've noticed when I changed my spark plugs the other day was that the right-hand bank, these three cylinders here, are really sooted up. The left-hand bank is giving me perfectly normal looking spark plugs. And that says to me that the O2 sensor on the right-hand bank is getting incorrect readings. And I believe it's because these valve stem seals have sooted up that particular O2 sensor. So that is the job today. Change the valve stem seals. Now, this is going to be the interesting part, is to change valve stem seals, normally you take the cylinder head off. Now, I've never actually done this procedure, although I've heard about it since I was an apprentice. You can do it by just pulling the rocker gear off and leaving the cylinder heads on. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to put the engine on TDC, we're going to put a little bit of compressed air into the cylinder to hold the valves closed, and then we're going to pull the valve stem, the valve springs and collets off and put the valve stem seals on and do it this way. The risk is, if I drop one of those exhaust valves, guess what my job is? Yeah, taking cylinder heads off. I do not want to do that. So this is going to be an interesting series of videos. What I'm going to do so that you guys can kind of chunk through this and get to the pieces of information you need to know, I'm going to chunk this down into a series of videos. I'm going to try and keep each one around about 10 minutes long, and just to help you get to what you need. But we're also going to put the whole lot together in one long video, however long that is, so that you can watch the whole thing back to back if that's what you're interested in. Now, whilst I'm doing this series of work, just for my own information, I'm actually going to do a compression test as well. And that is where I'm going to find out how healthy my piston rings, my valves are on this motor, just for my reference. I'm assuming it's going to come up good because the motor in general seems to be a fairly healthy sort of motor. But it's just a test I'm going to do at the same time, so that'll also be one of the videos. So we're going to cover off the following. We're going to cover off a bit more about O2 sensors. We're going to cover off changing the valve stem seals. We're going to cover off the compression test, and we're also going to just have a look at the spark plugs when I take them out and compare them to the new spark plugs I've got here. I tend to use NGK spark plugs. Why? I don't know. I've always used them. Since I was an apprentice, it was just like, do you want to use Champion? Do you want to use Bosch? Do you want to... I just always use NGK. Yeah, I don't know. They always seem to do the job anyway. So that's going to be interesting, an interesting video. I hope you appreciate it. Like I say, hit that subscribe button. If this is basically the introduction video, then we'll go on to the other ones. Now, a little bit about these vehicles, because this is my third Bundera. It's a short wheelbase Toyota Land Cruiser. It's coil sprung. Its vehicle designation is RJ70 for the petrols, which had a 22R 2.4 carburetor petrol motor, or an LJ70, which is the 2LT diesel motor came out in these. This is for the Australian market. There were some variants around the world. They ran through the mid-80s. This is an 88 model. When I purchased this vehicle about 3 years ago, or 3 years ago I should say, it was a disaster with rust. And now I'm going through the process of modifying it and building it into the vehicle that I want it to be. So I've done a whole heap of bar work. I've made my own custom front bull bar winch cradle and winch mount, giving me about 70 degrees of approach angle, which is brilliant off-road. Made my own stainless steel snorkel, complete with stainless steel head and all of that. I've made my own steel flares, but they're actually brush bars. Well, they're made out of pipe and they're really solid. I actually laid the vehicle against them in a rut the other day, and they took the weight of the truck, just no worries at all. I've made my own rock sliders, and I've made my own rear bar, which I've made so that I incorporate excellent departure angles. I've taken the actual tow pack, raised it and shortened it just to improve that departure angle. I've done things like mount my UHF aerial here on the RFI mount up here on the guard, just so that it's back and gives me a little bit extra height for that radio reception. Some of my future plans, I'm in the process of putting a 4-inch lift into it, so it's going to have a total of 6 inches of lift. It's got a 2-inch body lift in it now. It's running 33-inch tyres. I love those. So they're the 33 12.5 by 15 wheels. Ultimately, I actually want to put 80 series differentials under this, which will bring each tyre outwards about 80 millimetres. So it will make it a lot wider. I'm in the process also, I'd like to put into it a 4-link rear suspension in it. These have a really unique suspension. They're coil sprung, but they're a 3-link. So, same setup as the front of the GQ, GU Patrols or your 80 series, 105 series Land Cruisers, where you've got 2 radius arms and a panhard rod. That's how this is set up front and rear. So they're quite a different sort of vehicle. A lot of their running gear is actually based on a Hilux type variant. Some of the other modifications I've done, I've changed the gearbox in this. The standard gearbox for this designation, RJ70, is a G52. I've actually put an R151 gearbox, which comes out of the diesel variant, the LJ70. Don't get confused, stay with me. And the reason for that is the diesel gearbox is a stronger gearbox, so it's coping with the power out of the Ecotec. Not that they're that powerful. Mine, it gets this thing up in boogies. She will stand. If you get into a corner, she'll pick up that front left wheel pretty easy. But it gives me an excellent crawl gear in first low, and it gives me a really nice fifth gear. So what that's going to allow me to do, and then one of the next modifications I'll be doing in the next month or two, is fitting twin diff locks to it, but I'm going to fit a 5.29 diff ratio in here. It's currently 4.88. It crawls superb as it is, but with the 5.29 gear ratios, I reckon I'm going to see a lot better crawling. What I find at the moment, fifth gear is okay at 100, 110 kilometers an hour, but come to a rise and she's just a little bit laggy. You drop it to fourth and she screams. So with the lower diff ratios, fifth gear is going to become a bit more usable. So that's a bunch of the modifications that I've got planned. That's where she's at today. I know it's not totally on track for the video about this engine mod, but I can't help bragging about it because I love the thing. this particular part 2 is all about the compression test, and I want to do that so that I can understand the basic health of my engine, and the compression test is an excellent way to do that. So this is part 2 of this series. Here at Mad Matt 4-Wheel Drive, I'm all about educating and building community, especially within the 4-wheel drive space. So I love my 4-wheel drives, and I love my little Bunderas, which are Toyota Land Cruiser vehicles. So to start with, the first thing I'm going to do with the compression test is to pull out the spark plugs on all of the cylinders. Now I will say I've actually warmed the motor up a little bit so it's not dead cold, and that'll just give me a better set of numbers to work with, a little bit more reliable. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be pulling out my ECU fuse and my fuel pump relay. So that'll stop me pumping fuel in whilst I'm doing the cranking test, and it'll stop the ignition from firing. So let's pull these spark plugs out. When you pull your spark plug leads off, make sure you know where each spark plug lead goes back to. And you can either label them. My spark plug leads are already labelled from the, actually written on the plug leads. So what is a compression test? So essentially an engine needs to make explosions to run. I think we all probably understand that. And in an engine like this, it's called a 4-stroke engine. It uses four strokes of the piston going up and down to create the combustion cycle. So the 4 strokes are, the simple way to remember it is suck, push, bang, blow. They suck in air and fuel mixture. They push it up and compress it into a very dense mass. Then we ignite it with the spark plug, and it it bangs the piston back down. That's our power stroke. That's where the engine's actually doing something worthwhile. And then we blow the unwanted or waste gases out of the engine, and that's the exhaust stroke. And then that cycle starts again. So for each cycle, for one explosion, the piston needs to go up and down twice, and that gives us the 4 strokes. A 2-stroke engine, like a chainsaw or something like that, will only do that twice, but that's a whole different kettle of fish, and we won't go into that in this video. So a compression test, when we're doing that push stroke, where we're compacting it into a really tight mass, if that mass isn't tight enough, we don't get a good explosion. And so a compression test is where we're going to measure how much compression or pressure we create inside the cylinder. And we're going to use this little gauge here to do it. But let me keep getting these spark plugs out. So now I've got all the spark plugs out. I've got my ignition leads out of the way of fans or belts or anything like that, because we're going to actually turn the motor over. I've pulled out, in my case, my EFI relay and my fuel pump relay. In your case, you could do that, or you might pull the fuses out of the fuse panel. Just look in your owner's manual as to where those fuses are in your car. Essentially, you don't want spark and you don't want fuel for this test. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my compression tester, and you can buy these at pretty much any auto store, and it's going to screw into all different engines. They usually come with a bunch of different adapters, a flexible hose or whatever it might be, so that you can get it into the spark plug holes. And that's where this is going to screw into here. And then when we do the actual test, we're going to get a reading on this gauge. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write myself on a piece of paper 1 through 6 cylinders, and then when I get a reading, we're going to write that reading down. So once you get the compression gauge screwed into the cylinder, you then put the vehicle in neutral, put your handbrake on, make sure it's on, and then crank the engine over. And what I like to do is crank it so that the gauge does about 8 or 9 hits, or that cylinder basically registers on the gauge 8 or 9 times. Well, the numbers are in, and I am very happy, but it is as expected. Now, one thing I failed to mention earlier in the video is this. I also held open the throttle, and that's just to allow lots of air in whilst I'm cranking the engine over. So just remember to do that. Now, what numbers did I get? My gauge registers in PSI. So basically 170, 165 was my lowest. My highest was 180. The rule of thumb is 15 degrees spread. Now I've gone to my workshop manual, they give me a 30% spread. So the spread is the distance between, or the difference between the lowest and the highest. Look, I am well and truly inside those spread specifications. And it also tells me what the minimum compression I'm allowed is. And it converts to, from KPA in the book, it converts to 100 PSI. I am well and truly in the specification range. So what that tells me is my engine is as healthy as I could ever want it to be. And that's to be expected. This motor was brand new when it was put into the conversion. So that's a great thing. Now, if I got some numbers back here that were a bit variable, the next test I would do is a wet test. And that's what I've got a column here. I'm not going to do it in this video, but that's basically, I would put a squirt or two of oil into each cylinder, and that's going to flow down and sit on top of the piston rings. And when I did the compression test again, if I see these numbers increase, that tells me that the oil has sealed up the rings and has given me more compression. That would tell me that my rings are worn out and I need to do the engine up. If it didn't make a difference, that tells me that the low compression could be coming from a leaking head gasket, my inlet or exhaust valves being leaky and needing a service. But that sort of information can be gathered. Now, there are other tests that you can do, and that would be a cylinder leak down test. That's a little bit more involved, but that's basically we put compressed air into the cylinder on compression stroke where the spark plug would fire at that part of the cycle. We would put compressed air in there and we see how long it takes for that air to leak away. It also tells us where the air's coming out. So we might be able to, if it's let's say the inlet valve is faulty, we would hear the air leaking out through the inlet manifold, or an exhaust valve, we'll hear it through the exhaust pipe. So the cylinder leak down test is a more advanced test again that can tell us the health of the engine. Anyway, I hope this has been a helpful video for you to understand how to do a compression test on your engine. If it has, I'd love you to hit that subscribe button. My grandfather said to me when I was a young apprentice mechanic, he said, "Matthew, you need to start with the simple things first." So, not being a complete expert on these motors, I did exactly that. And I started with the spark plugs. I just changed them out and we went, and it ran great for a couple of months, and then the misfire came back. So that's when I thought, right, there's something else going on here. So the very first thing I did was I changed the heat range of the spark plugs. I put a colder plug in. What does that mean? It means that the spark plug is actually going to run hotter. It's a bit backwards. I don't quite know why they do it that way, but hey, it means that the spark plug runs hotter. Therefore, the spark plug has a better ability to self-clean and burn off any sooty build-ups and carbon build-ups that happen on the spark plugs. The number that designates the heat range is this number 5 there, and those spark plugs went in and everything was great for again a couple of months, and then she started to misfire again, and I pulled them out and these plugs were as dirty as anything. I thought, right, we're going to have to dig deeper, and that's when knowing that the engine's been burning a little bit of engine oil and so on, I thought that's going to be the root cause, so we're going to resolve it. So what I did in the meantime, just to keep me running, and this is a great tip you could use if you were out fall driving and you started to have a misfire and it was caused by the spark plugs, I closed the gap up. Now these spark plugs are meant to run at 1.3, which is the spacing between there, and I've closed them up. What that does is that it closes the distance between the electrode in the center and the earth pole on the outside, and it makes it easier for the spark plug to jump across. Therefore, it will resolved that misfire issue to some extent. And because what you got going on here is the coil is making electricity and it's shoving a whole stack of volts up here. It comes up the middle through the spark plug and it has to jump the gap to create the spark plug. It's exactly like lightning, just not quite as powerful. So the spark jumps the gap there and ignites your fuel and air mixture. When that spark plug gets dirty, it's higher resistance, it's harder for the electricity to get across and it stops working. And so by closing the gap up, I just help the spark jump the gap. And I closed them up and they still misfired a little bit, but it did come good and it was certainly drivable. So I've been driving like that for about a week or so, and it has actually cleaned these spark plugs up a little bit. They're not as sooty as they were when I took them out a week ago, but they're still not healthy. I've still got that misfire, and it all comes down to what I believe being the oil that the engine is burning. So let's just have a look at how we check a spark plug. So this is a brand new spark plug. Now I'm going back to the correct heat range, which is the number 6 for this engine. So we've got the number 6 going in, and whenever you're putting new spark plugs in, it's always really important that you check the gap here. Now these are specified, as I say, for 1.3. So I've got my feeler gauges here, which are little bits of metal that are a perfectly machined thickness, and it's got it written on there what that thickness is. It's both written in imperial, which is 1/1000th of an inch, or thou as we call it. So it's 0.019, and that's the imperial measurement, and then the metric measurement is 0.483 millimeters. So I've got two feeler gauges together to give me 1.3, and you put it in the gap there between the electrode and the earth pole, and you want to just make sure that that spark plug is actually gapped correctly. Nowadays, generally they are correct out of the factory, but I have seen them incorrect from time to time. If you needed to adjust it, the simplest way is on a firm surface like a vise or something. You just give it a little bit of a tap like that, and it'll just close that up, or you can very carefully pry that open if you needed to make it wider. And that's how you're going to gap it. The other thing I'd like to say about spark plugs, there's basically two types. There's this type here which has a tapered seat, and on the box it will give you a specification for how tight to tighten the spark plug up. Plugs don't need to be tightened up really tight, and it says 1/16th of a turn on there. So it's like, turn it that much, that's tight. Okay, you'll be surprised that you're not going to reef on these things, but you over tighten that because they're exposed to so much heat, they can seize up in your cylinder head and strip the thread, and let me tell you, then you're in grief. You've got a real problem. There's another type of spark plug, and you'll see it's got like a washer on here, and it crushes as you tighten the spark plug up. So with those ones, generally it's about half a turn. Might go to 3/4 of a turn on those sort of spark plugs. But again, it'll tell you on the box how tight to make them, and that'll make sure that you never have a drama when it comes to removing them from your engine. Now I'm going to do something I've never done before in all of my mechanicking history, and we're going to show you a very cool trick that can save you a lot of money. Here at Mad Matt 4Drive, I'm all about educating and building the four-wheel drive community so that we can all go wheeling well and have a fantastic time. And if you love this content, make sure you hit that subscribe button down there. So the issue I have is my engine burns a little bit of oil on the overrun or after a long idle period. And the way I know that is when I'm on the overrun and come back on the power, there's a big plume of blue smoke. Or when I'm sitting at the traffic lights and when I take off, there's a big plume of blue smoke. And effectively what I believe happens is that some engine oil is getting sucked down past the valve stem seals underneath the rocker covers, and because at idle and on the overrun, the engine creates the highest amount of vacuum, and that vacuum is sucking engine oil into my combustion chambers and burning. And why does that cause me a misfire? Well, what happens is when that smoke goes through the engine, it comes out the exhaust pipe and it fouls up the oxygen sensors. And then when the oxygen sensor or O2 sensor is fouled up, it doesn't tell the computer the correct information. So the computer starts to feed in too much fuel. And I've been seeing that happen in this motor. When it does that, the spark plugs start to foul up and get sooty, and then they misfire under load, because that's when a spark plug has to do its work harder. So it's a very roundabout way of finding the original cause. Something my grandfather said to me when I was a young mechanic was, always look at the simple things first. So I started out by looking at the spark plugs. They were simple, but I always knew I had this oil burning issue. So let's get into it. I'm going to take the rocker covers off, I'm going to take the rocker gear off, and we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of how do you change your valve stem seals without pulling the cylinder heads off. It's kind of cool. I've never done it. I hope I get it right. Let's see how we go. So this is the rocker gear. These are what open and close the valves. The valves are just down under here, and the valve stem seals will be under these springs. So the next thing we're going to do is take these off, and then we'll get into it. Right, it's been a couple of hours. I know it hasn't for you, but for me it has, because I needed to do a couple before I actually came back to the camera, which I'm doing now. So I've had to make myself up a special little tool like this, just cut out a cutout and work something out that's going to work for my vehicle. Your vehicle may well be different. Other than that, I'm not really using any specialist tools or anything like that. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring the camera in close and we're going to go through it. I'm going to do one right there in front of you on screen, and we'll talk it through as we go, and you'll watch me make mistakes and it'll all be pretty cool. So I'll reset the camera and we'll rip into it. Okay guys, so the first thing I did when I got the rocker gear off was I chucked the rag in there, because I don't want bits going down into the sump. That would be a problem. Then we've got to put the engine, so one of the piston we're working on is at top dead center. And so the easiest way to do that, shove a screwdriver down the plug hole, just a small one like this, and then I put a spanner up here on the alternator and just turned the motor over. Because it's in no plugs and no valve gear, it turns real easy. Once I've got it on TD or top dead center for that cylinder, I put it in 5th gear and away we went. Now next thing we're going to do is put this device in to put compressed air in the cylinder. So I've adapted my compression tester that I used earlier to have this valve on it and then an airline fitting. Okay, and so we screw that down in here into the plug hole. So we're achieving two things here. Two means, well, I should say, I suppose, the worst thing that could happen would be one of the valves dropped inside the engine, because you've got to pull your heads off. And I don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. That's why I'm doing it this way. So by having the piston at top dead center, the piston itself is one reason the valve can't drop in, and compressed air in there is the second reason it can't drop in. So now that's hooked up, I can hook my airline up. All right, and then I'm just going to turn a little bit of compressed air on, and all going well, the motor won't rotate. Because it's in gear, being manual, there's a little bit of an air leak there, but hey, that's fun, isn't it? Not worried about it. A little bit of leak is all good. Okay, so that's there. Now we've got those two in place. So the next thing we're going to do is get my special tool. Now, if you want to buy this tool, the part number is 76DMM for Mad Matt 72. You won't find it on eBay or on the internet or anywhere actually, because I made it for this job and it's mine. It's not for sale. Having you on. All right, so that's the tool that goes on there. Then I need to get over here. Sorry, camera was in the way. It's kind of challenging filming this one for you guys. All right, so once the tool's in place, you can see how it's going to push down on this outer part here of the valve. Now I'll tighten it up. You watch. Watch this. See it go down? Now I need to grab my I have a magnet, and I just, all going well, suck these half bits. These are called collets. Don't ask me to spell it. I use the magnet because I just don't want to drop them. Believe it or not, I've already dropped two doing some of the other ones when I was practicing. Okay, here we go. Come on, girl. All right, so there they are. I'm leaving them stuck to my magnet. Oh, put that back up here on the battery. Okay, so now we'll take the spring off. So we just back this off, bring that out. It comes up and out. Put this Buick special tool away. Okay, and that's my springs and my seat. And that's the stem seal there. See that piece there? That's a valve stem, just there. Now, what I do to get the seal off is just pick it up with a screwdriver. There she goes. You might be able to get it off with a pair of pliers or that, but I'm just being stupidly careful because I just hate the idea of dropping a valve. Okay, so there you go. That's the old valve stem seal that should be leaking, all going well. Okay, so I'll grab the new valve stem seals here. Look at this. Generally you have two different types. Inlet, which is this black rubber, and exhaust, which is this brown rubber. And the brown is for the exhaust because they tend to run hotter, and so the rubber needs to be more tolerable to heat. Now, before I chuck the seal on, chuck a bit of oil up around there, just to give it that lubrication when she first fires up. Okay, and put that down. Now, I'll grab this. I've got this socket which is perfectly sized, and I just holding it very square, tap that down. Okay, I can actually hear a difference in the sound once that goes home, but I also take the verniers and I just do a measurement of the seal to the stem, and it's proving to be 24 millimeters. Bang on, there you go, 24 millimeters. So I know that valve stem seal is absolutely home and hosed. Okay, so now we got to put the spring and the spring seat back on. Grab the special tool. I'm rather chuffed with this tool. You know, you make your own tools, and when it works an absolute treat every time, you just go, yes, I'm an expert. You know what an expert is? An X is a has-been, a spurt's a drip under pressure. All right, here we go. Tighten this down. Now, I've got to try and keep it a bit centered here. Okay, so now we put the collets back in. These slippery little suckers. But that just goes in there. And what I've been finding works is, sorry about my hand being in the way, rotate the collet up round to the top side there, and then get the bottom one back in. It just seems to have more space. So can you see how they're both sitting in there, but they're both loose at the moment. So now I'll hold them there as I bring the spring up. There you go. Look at that. Lovely. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? All right, so there you go. That is pretty much all done now on this bank. I'll go and do the other bank. I'll put the rocker gear back on, push rods in, all of that sort of stuff. Rocker cover on, and it's ready to go. Stem seals changed. Well, I trust you found that absolutely fascinating. I'm buzzing that I'm actually getting this to work. It's just so cool. Anyway, now once I get all of these stem seals changed, I'm then going to go over and change the O2 sensors. So that'll be another video, a separate video, unless you're watching this in the full compilation video. But it's hot. I'm having fun. We're getting the job done. All right, guys, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now, this video is going to be all about the O2 sensors and how they've played their part in the issue and I've cut one apart, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a moment. Here at Mad Matt 4Drive, I'm all about educating and building the four-wheel drive community so that we can all go and wheel well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you reckon this content's worth a subscription. I reckon it is anyway. Hey, basically what was happening, I was developing a miss in my four-wheel drive. There were some other symptoms as well, and that was a little bit of blue smoke on the overrun or when I'd been idling at the traffic lights. So that was telling me a bit of a story. And if you'd like to find out about that, go and watch part 1 on this video, and I'll go into that in a bit more depth for you. In this one, I really do want to focus in on the O2 sensors and how they played their part, because essentially they were getting contaminated and dirty and were no longer sending the correct information out to the ECU. So the ECU couldn't do its job properly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reset the camera, punch it right in here on the desk, and we're going to have a real close-up look. So an O2 sensor, which is this device here, is used by the computer, the ECU in the car, to monitor how much oxygen is in the exhaust. And the reason it does that is it tells it then how much petrol it can put into the combustion chamber to make an explosion so the engine will run. So let's have a look at how one works. I've cut one of these apart. So this side was out of my left-hand bank on the engine. Now, if this isn't totally making sense, it's because this video is part of a complete series of videos, and you can go and watch part 1. That'll give you a whole bunch of insight. But I do cover some of this information in part 1, but we're going deeper here. So the left-hand bank, this O2 sensor here, was generally seemed to be doing the right thing. The spark plugs look clean and so on. The one I've cut apart was definitely not doing the right thing, and we were having rich running there. That was where the misfire was coming from. So the way an O2 sensor works is this is inside the exhaust pipe. It gets really hot. It only starts working when it's above 600 degrees Celsius. So this side is looking at the oxygen in the exhaust, but this side is also looking at oxygen, but it's looking at the atmospheric oxygen, i.e. how much oxygen is in the air around the sensor. And the way it does that is by, believe it or not, a minute amount of air that passes between these wires and that rubber grommet into this cavity in here. It's hard to imagine that that would be enough air for the sensor to work, but it is. And so the sensor is comparing those two zones of oxygen, and it's sending a signal back to the ECU. And the signal is somewhat, it varies from 0.1 of a volt to 0.9 of a volt, and it looks like a square waveform, sort of, if I drew it, it's sort of like this. And so it's low, it's high, it's low, it's high, and it's shuttling between those two and volts, and it's telling the computer what's going on. So if it's got too much fuel, then it gets a higher voltage. If it's got not enough, it gets a lower voltage, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how the O2 compares the oxygen. And the way it does it is all of this stuff here. Now, as I understand it, the center section here has a mixture, well, it's mainly made of zirconium, and it has a platinum in their platinum section in there as well, and that when those two react to heat, they end up creating that electrical voltage that we are looking for. Now, so this section here is where the O2 sensor starts to fail. So this little tip here is what used to live on the end there, and you can see these flutes that allow the exhaust gas to get in there and react with the zirconium and platinum, all right? And then that sends our signal up through these wires here. Now, this is what we call a 4-wire O2 sensor, okay? So there's 4 wires there. Now let's have a look at what those wires do. The first wire, which is this, looks like it's the pink one in there, white. It comes in here, and it is this earth at the bottom there. So that's giving us a ground on the total unit. And then the other 3 wires, well, one of those wires is the wire that sends the signal back to the ECU with the voltage. The other 2 wires are used to provide a heating source. Remember I said it needs to be 600 degrees Celsius or higher? Well, to make sure that we get up to that temperature nice and quickly, we have a heater inside here. Now I'm presuming that it's between these, this purple wire is one of those, and then one of these 2 heats that center core, and that creates the circuit, hence it heats up, and therefore the unit, the O2 sensor, can start to react nice and quickly. All right, now let's open this up a bit further. I wanted to do this on camera, so I want to see what goes on inside here. Now I presume I can cut it with a grinder. Let's find out. Wow. Wow, look at that. So there you go. So that section there, I'm assuming this is the zirconium bit. And then down here, we've got all of this stuff here. So it doesn't want to come apart. I was hoping it might actually want to pull apart. But the comparison, this section here will be capturing the exhaust temperature, gases, O2, and this side out here is measuring the ambient air. Now, why has mine failed? Well, partly it's probably age. You know, it's just been in there for however long, I don't know. But look here, look at this brown stain. That's, to my eye, mud. How's that, eh? So it's got dirty in there by, I guess, going up through these wires here. You know, this is the inside sleeve that used to go up over there, and there, you know, when I wipe it, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but just that section there where I wiped it, it's a bit cleaner. So all of that is going to mean that this O2 sensor was giving us a misrepresentation, and therefore I was having my miss. So it's worth actually changing these out on a regular basis. And what you're finding these days is that most modern cars actually have them as a service interval. So hopefully that's helpful in understanding how the O2 sensor works. Now, I'm not an engineer that designs the things, but that's how my understanding of these works, and I find that stuff absolutely fascinating. Now, if you've appreciated this video, I'd love you to hit that subscribe button. And if you've been one of those guys that's actually watched the whole compilation video from end to end, well, I'm going to go and take the Bundera for a drive now that it's all finished and have a little bit of fun. So you want to watch some of that? Come on, let's go. It's always good when you get a big job like that done and you get a nice pleasing result. She's going great, which is the idea of it. So I guess I should go for a bit of a wheel. What do you reckon? Or a 1UZ. A nice V8 in the girl. It's been done before too. Maybe I should do that. Nah, let's go wheeling. Enjoy the footage after this. I'm Mad Matt. Stay safe on the trails.
Oh, there goes his seal.